first candle is lit to honor Christianity. Let them praise God's name with dancing. Let them sing praises to him with timbrel and lyre. The second candle is lit to honor Judaism. When we view our talents as God's endowment to our soul, then cultivating that talent becomes an imperative. There is humility in this knowledge that creative expression is a means for the soul to fulfill its unique mission. The third candle is lit to honor Buddhism. A bucket of water is not filled by the first drop or the last drop. It is filled by every drop, one by one. The fourth candle is lit to honor Taoism. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. The fifth candle is lit to honor the spirituality of the Tsleil-Waututh Native Americans. Love is something you and I must have. We must have it because our spirit feeds upon it. We must have it because without it we become weak and faint. Without it, our courage fails. Without love, we can no longer look confidently at the world. With it, we are creative. With it, we march tirelessly. With it and with it alone, we are able to sacrifice for others. The sixth candle is lit to honor Islam. Raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder. And the final candle is lit to honor Confucianism. When the likes and dislikes are not properly controlled and our conscious minds are distracted by the material world, we lose our true selves and nature is destroyed. Today's reading comes from our founder, Ernest Holmes. Regardless of the situations or persons that we feel inclined to dislike or hate, we must resist the inclination. In some way, we have to find something of value in them, no matter how big or little it may be. Then concentrate on that. Once this is done, then there can start to flow from us a feeling of love. And once the flow is started, then the channel of reciprocal action opens up. As we give, so we will receive. Let's take these words into a few moments of silent contemplation. So I center myself here and now in this place. I am an open conduit so that divine love may flow. And I know that Spirit is all around us, within each of us, expressing as each of us, that we are each a divine conduit. And that we are each here by divine appointment. This is holy ground and sacred time. And I am deeply, deeply grateful. I'm grateful for all that are in attendance, all that hear my voice. I am grateful for Reverend Cece and the message that can only come through her as her here and now. I know that this community is a blessing and that we are blessed. And so it is.
I have to tell you, I have just been on the biggest spiritual whirlwind lately. It's been nuts. I went off to the woods for a few days and I read this great book on, it's called If Women Rose Rooted, and it's about the spirituality of our place, where we are, where we grew up, the stories and the myths and the things like that we learn. And I read another wonderful book on what it means to be in community, real deep community with each other. And I'm in the middle of a class that's about trying to sense what future is trying to be born, is trying to emerge. Because, it happens so fast and it's so constant these days that you sort of almost just sort of have to envision it as it comes and do pilot projects and see what works. There is no certainty that like the way we've always done church is going to continue. There's no certainty that the way we've always done our banking is going to continue to work. There's so many things that we can no longer do the way we've always done, and we sort of have to let the future emerge by means of us. And there's a couple of great books I'm reading in connection with that class. It's from Dr. Jim Lockard, who now lives in Lyon, France. So we get to hear what he ate for dinner, as well as, the class that he's teaching. It's really wonderful stuff and kind of mind-boggling. So I hope I have a lot of things I'm trying to figure out how to talk about, and some of them are difficult. Not because they're hard subjects, but because they're hard to talk about. They're felt more than anything else. And we may get into that today, and if so, I apologize. This month is about creativity and power and choice. And last week we talked about the place where much of our power lies, and it lies in that story we tell ourselves about life, about the divine, however you think of it, about the world, about who we are. And so when we choose to tell a new story, we have a new experience. We make a new life for ourselves. We change, ultimately, the way of the whole world when we change the story, right? Because the world story is our collective story. There's a wonderful program that I'm sure some of you know from National Public Radio. It's called On Being. And I just happened to catch an interview yesterday with a man from Great Britain. His name is Jonathan Rowson. And he founded this, he's a philosopher and a chess grandmaster, which is such an interesting combination. He founded this organization called Perspectiva, and they exist to lean into the future and to see and sense what's trying to come into being in terms of consciousness, and then support that future with political and social structures. And their mission or vision is integrating our souls, systems, and society, which I just think is an incredible mission. I love it. So in this interview, he talks about this moment we live in, this moment of undefined yet palpable spiritual awakening in the world. We talk about that a lot, right? We sense it and we feel it, but we really aren't quite sure what it looks like. And Rowson used a parallel with today from the axial age. And the axial age was a 500-year period from about 800 BCE to about 300 BCE. And there was this huge spiritual and social and societal upheaval going on during that period. It was a very violent time, and in several places there was just a complete social upheaval. And ultimately, out of the axial age came Buddhism, Jainism, Taoism, Confucianism, Zoroastrianism, Platonic philosophy, and a whole bunch more. It was a very rich time for consciousness to shift and to come forward. And it's also been called the Great Leap of Being, that period. And a new spiritual awakening and a shift in perception from societal to individual values happened then. And Rowson says the same thing is happening now, that there is an enormous leap of being going on in us and around us and all around the world, a spiritual reawakening, if you will, a shift from focus so much on the individual to focus on the community, the health and the well-being of community and of the societies we build together. And he said this in the interview. It's kind of philosopher speak, so I'll translate it in a minute. He says, for an individual to become more conscious is a story of personal growth, in which the scope for meaning and purpose in life is enriched and expanded, and our capacity to effect felicitous change is enhanced. We cease to be merely shaped by the signs, symbols, and stories around us, and we start to assume authorship of such influences and develop a deeper, reflexive awareness of that process of authoring, kind of like philosophers speak. what he's saying is we become conscious that we can change the world and we can change our lives. We can author new futures for ourselves and our planet. And we sense that we're here to do just that. That's why we're here, right? We do it by better understanding our inner lives and by becoming sort of the witness to our old habits, our old thought habits that keep us stuck. We look at them from a little bit of distance and say, does this serve me or does this not serve me? Do I want to keep this way of thinking or do I want to find a new one? And that's exactly what we teach here. And what we're learning together is to see our old habits from that seat of witness and make a choice. Does this serve my world? Does this serve me or not? That's where we have the point of choice, is when we see what's going on and we say, whatever's behind this, which I know must be caused in here, is not serving me. It's not serving me. I'm going to do something different. And sometimes it just seems impossible, doesn't it? I mean, sometimes we look in our own heads, we look out here in the world, and it looks like everything's kind of meshed and woven and tangled up together. We look at the world and the problems and the issues in the world, and it seems impossible to see where one ends and the next begins, and they're all kind of just all mashed together. And so we look at it and just go, whew. It's like, let's take a situation, climate collapse. Climate collapse is tied to our economic system, which is growth at any cost. It's tied to our system where, money flows, all wealth flows one way. It's tied to the political structures of all parties who seek to maintain the status quo, so on and so on and so on. And so we look at it and we see this big tangled mess, and we say, well, this is like impossible to untangle. I don't even know where to start. Where do we even start? And when we look in our own minds at all these interwoven old thought patterns, we can say, where do I even start? Right? This is just such a mess. I don't know what to do. And so what we do instead is disconnect. We disconnect from all that. And Ralston calls that stealth denial. I love that term, stealth denial. We know something is true, but we don't really feel it's true. We don't really believe it. We know intellectually that it's true, but we don't believe it. We haven't hooked our hearts into it. We don't live as if it's true. We speak as if we believe it, but our decisions show that maybe we don't believe it. Maybe we just know it intellectually. Because it appears impossible to untangle. And so we sort of just disconnect. We speak, many of us speak as if we believe we're all one, as if we're powerful, creative beings, as if we believe we can change the way we think. Then we walk out the door and immediately make someone who pulls in front of us in traffic the other. I'm speaking about myself here. We make them the other, right? Or the person in the grocery store who's like parked their cart right in the middle and they're standing there looking at the cans and not moving. You know those people. You know the people I'm talking about. The ones who frustrate us, they immediately become the other. We forget the oneness, it goes right out the window. When I first came into this philosophy, one of the things that struck me terrified right away was the idea that I am responsible for my experience of life. And I took my teacher's advice. He says, if you want to know what you really believe about things, look at your life. And I looked at my life and said, oh, hell no. I don't want to look at this anymore. Wait a minute. My life is a mess. It looked like a big pile of snakes to me, and they were all tangled up together, and I couldn't even see where one ended and the next one began. It took a long time before I realized that this tangled mess was just rope, not snakes, first off. they were old cords of thought, and that if I picked up one and started to work with it and worked to change that thought, pretty soon the next one just appeared, and I worked on that one, and pretty soon it was untangled, and then the next one showed up, and I just continued to do what was in front of me. But before that, I could talk a good talk, I could write a good paper, but I didn't really believe it. It was still denial in action. It took a while, and there are still knots in my consciousness. I think it's part of the human condition. Grief is very difficult for me. Thinking about death is difficult for me. Not falling into fear is difficult for me. I was raised by people who were a little bit over dramatic about all that stuff. And so I do the same kind of thing with those topics. It's, I can talk about it in the correct way, but I don't always feel what I'm saying. It's still denial again, but at least I recognize it now. I recognize it, and I keep taking it back to my spiritual practice. I keep taking it into meditation and trying to get a little distance from it so I can see it for what it is. I keep taking it to contemplation. I keep taking it to affirmative prayer. I keep trying to break through and let it go. Even when it's hard, even when it seems like I can't do this, even when it looks easier just to deny it. We all have these kinds of things in our consciousness. We do. It's part of being human. It is the central paradox, I think, of being a conscious human. We're willing to look at the whole, the big picture, which sometimes just looks like a bunch of snakes. And we go, where do I even start? So we're also willing, in the same moment, to do what's in front of us, to do just what's in front of us at any given moment and take whatever the next step is. Because our primary responsibility at any given moment is what we do next and how we do it well, right? So that's what we have to keep doing, is what's next? What's next? What's next? In his book, The Science of Mind, and all of his writings, our founder Ernest Holmes talks about this conundrum a lot. He writes, the inherent nature of humans is forever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom. And then he goes right on to talk about the ways we keep ourselves from being free, right? He talks about changing our habits of thinking about other people and our relationships with them. He talks about how we're inclined to judge and to make snap judgments about people, about how we're inclined to think there's not enough, that there'll never be enough, that we're not enough, that there's not enough love, that there's not enough time, that there's not enough money. Holmes recognized that we do these things and we do them over and over and over. Yet, he repeats, our inherent nature is forever seeking to express itself in freedom. And he gives us a little tool right there. Right there. He says in today's reading, regardless of the situations or persons that we feel inclined to dislike or even hate, we must resist the inclination. In some way, we have to find something of value in them, no matter how big or little it may be, and we have to concentrate on that. Once this is done, there can start to flow forth from us a feeling of love. And once the flow is started, the channel of reciprocal action opens up, and as we give, so we shall receive. It's a really simple little tool, find something of value in the person we dislike, no matter how big or little. And then we start to love the person. We can hardly help it, right? When we see and know someone, there's something always to love somewhere. And we do that again, and we do that again, and we do that again, and pretty soon love grows in our lives because we are the presence of love, and what we give, we receive back. He reminds us of the teachings of the mystics of the axial age and beyond, that instead of denying or ignoring or bypassing fear and worry and judgment and hatred, we have to find something of value, something holy, something true, something beautiful in the situation we are in, and focus on that. We have to let that holy and beautiful thing be our vision. We have to hold true to it, and pretty soon we are changed. We are changed. Holmes is talking about what one philosopher called the visionary anticipation of a direction. It's not so much thinking things will be better. It's about envisioning a place that's better, a state that's better, a feeling that's better. Envisioning that, someplace that's worth going to. And then orienting our will towards that. Instead of orienting our will towards holding on to what doesn't serve us. That's how we live from choice, right? We choose to orient our will towards this vision that's worth going to. That's how we have hope. That's how we change our lives. That's how we grow our faith. That's how we change our world. I found this quote from Václav Havel, who you will remember was the first president of Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic after all the stuff that happened. And he said, "Hope is a state of mind, not a state of world. It is an orientation of the spirit and an orientation of the heart, and it transcends the world that is immediately experienced. It is anchored somewhere beyond the horizons." Hope, in this deep and powerful sense, is not the same as joy that things are going well, or a willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously heading for success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good. It's not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. I love that, because it's not, we don't necessarily have to have the conviction that something will turn out well if we have the conviction that it's right, that it makes sense. We head in that direction. And here's what happens when we do that. When we remember that what we're envisioning makes sense and is good, we will get through the times when we start to doubt. When we start to doubt how it's all going to turn out. When we do that, when we have that vision, when we hold that vision, when we cast our vision into the future and see those places that are worth going to, the places that make sense to us, individually and collectively, it has to turn out well. It has to turn out well. That's how the universe works, right? And that is the law and the promise of our lives. That if we do that, we will wind up in a place that makes sense.